Have you ever looked at someone you've known your entire life, someone who shares your blood, your memories, your entire childhood, and realized you don't know them at all? I mean, truly. Not just that they have a favorite color you forgot or a new hobby you didn't know about. I mean, looking into their eyes and seeing a stranger looking back. A stranger who wears your brother's face, smiles with your brother's smile, but behind that mask is something cold, something calculating. That's a feeling that settles in your bones, a chilling realization that everything you thought was solid ground was actually just a thin sheet of ice over a freezing dark ocean. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet, sterile click of a mouse and a single PDF file on my computer screen. That file, a bank statement, was the beginning of the end. It was the first breadcrumb on a trail that would lead me to a devastating truth. My brother, my partner, my best friend Ethan had systematically siphoned over $800,000 from the business we had built from scratch. Our dream. And that quiet click of the mouse was the gunshot that started a war. I never wanted to fight a war that would pit sister against brother in a court of law and shatter my family forever. You see, before all of this, our story was the American dream, or so I thought. Ethan and we were two sides of the same coin. I was the hands, he was the voice. Ever since we were kids, growing up in a small town in Oregon, that's how it was. I was the one in the garage with our dad Richard, learning how to measure twice and cut once. Dad wasn't a professional woodworker, he was an engineer, but he had a passion for it. He loved the precision, the honesty of wood. He'd say, "Clara, wood doesn't lie. You can't cheat it. You have to respect it." And I fell in love with that. The smell of sawdust was my cologne. The feeling of turning a rough, splintery plank into something smooth, beautiful, and useful. It felt like magic. I spent my teenage years building everything from bookshelves for our mom, Mary, to a ridiculous, over-engineered treehouse in the backyard that Ethan immediately claimed as his executive clubhouse. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't tell a dovetail joint from a Phillips head screwdriver. His magic was different. He could talk. Oh, man, could he talk. He could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. He was charming, charismatic, the life of every party. While I was covered in sawdust, he was the one winning school elections, charming teachers into giving him extensions and talking his way out of trouble. Our parents saw it too. They adored him. They saw his charisma as a sign of future greatness. I was the reliable one, the steady one. "Good old Clara," they'd say, patting me on the back. "She's got her father's hands." But when they looked at Ethan, their eyes would sparkle. That one mom would say with a knowing smile, "He's going to be someone important." I never resented it. Not really. I loved my brother. He was my protector on the playground, the one who gave me questionable advice on how to talk to boys, the one who made our quiet family dinners feel like an event. We were a team. The idea for Timber and Soul, our company, was born on one of those rare Oregon summer nights. We were in our early 20s, sitting on the porch of our parents' house, drinking cheap beer. I'd just finished a custom dining table for a family friend, and they'd paid me more than I made in 2 weeks at my dead-end construction job. Ethan had just quit another sales gig he found boring. He looked at the table, then looked at me. "You know, sis," he said, his eyes lit with that familiar fire, "you're an artist. A true craftsman. But you suck at selling yourself. You'd probably trade a masterpiece like this for a six-pack and a thank you." He wasn't wrong. "And me," he continued, puffing out his chest. "I can sell anything. We could be huge. You build it, I'll sell it. We'll call it Timber and Soul, because you put your soul into the timber." It felt perfect. It felt like destiny. We drafted a business plan on a napkin that night. We pooled our meager savings, took out a small business loan that our dad reluctantly co-signed for after a lot of convincing from Ethan, of course, and we rented a small, dusty workshop on the industrial side of town. The first 2 years were a grind. I worked 18-hour days, my hands were raw, calloused, and constantly stained. I lived off coffee and pure passion. Ethan was a whirlwind of energy. He built our website, cold-called designers, went to every farmer's market and craft fair within a 100-mile radius. He'd bring clients to the workshop and his face would light up as he explained my process, using words I didn't even know, talking about the narrative of the grain and the heritage of the craftsmanship. He made it sound like I wasn't just building furniture, I was creating heirlooms. And it worked. Orders started trickling in, then flowing, then pouring. We were a perfect partnership. I trusted him implicitly. He handled the client-facing stuff, the marketing, the accounts, the billing. I was happy to be left alone in my sanctuary of wood and steel. I just wanted to create. "Don't you worry your sawdust-filled head about the numbers, Clara," he'd say with a grin ruffling my hair like he did when we were kids. "That's my department. You just keep making beautiful things and I'll make us rich." And for 5 years it seemed like he was doing just that. We moved into a bigger workshop, hired a small team of apprentices, and our pieces were being featured in design magazines. We were a success story. Our parents were so proud. At family dinners, Dad would talk about my craftsmanship, but Mom would beam about Ethan's business acumen. "He's a natural-born CEO," she'd declare. And Ethan would soak it all in telling stories of landing huge contracts of schmoozing with high-end clients. I was just the quiet sister in the corner, smiling content that our shared dream was coming true. I trusted him with everything. Our finances, our future, our dream. It was all in his hands. And that was my first and most devastating mistake. I was so focused on the soul of the business, I never thought to check its pulse. If you're watching this right now and you've ever had that gut feeling that something isn't right, even with someone you love, I need you to hear this. Trust that feeling. Before I tell you about the moment I pulled on that first thread and watched our entire world unravel, do me a favor. If you want to hear the rest of this story about loyalty, betrayal, and the fight for justice within a family, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is a journey you won't want to miss. The first sign, the very first whisper that something was amiss was so small I almost dismissed it as a trick of the light. It was about 3 years into our success, a time when we were really hitting our stride. We had just landed a major contract to furnish a new boutique hotel downtown. It was our biggest project to date, a monumental undertaking that had me and my team working around the clock. The stress was immense, but the excitement was palpable. This project was going to put timber and soul on the map, not just locally, but nationally. Ethan was in his element. He was the one who had schmoozed the developers, the one who had negotiated the terms, the one who came back to the workshop, popping a bottle of champagne, announcing the news like he'd just won the Super Bowl. We all celebrated, and I remember feeling this profound sense of gratitude for him. I couldn't have done this without him. I was the engine, but he was the driver, steering us toward this incredible future. During that time, Ethan's lifestyle began to change. It was subtle at first. He traded in his reliable but boring sedan for a sleek black German luxury car. "Got a great lease deal," he'd said with a casual wave of his hand. "We have to look the part, Clara. Image is everything when you're dealing with these high-roller clients." It made sense. I, on the other hand, was still driving my 10-year-old pickup truck, the bed perpetually filled with lumber and sawdust. He started wearing expensive suits, Italian leather shoes, and a watch that cost more than my truck. Again, he justified it as a business expense. "When I walk into a meeting, I'm not just selling furniture," he explained. "I'm selling a lifestyle. I'm selling the Timber and Soul brand." I didn't question it. Why would I? The business was booming, money was coming in, and he was the one bringing it in. It seemed logical that he, as the face of the company, should reflect our success. Then came the dinners, the trips. He was constantly whining and dining potential clients. He'd text me pictures from fancy restaurants, rooftop bars, and even a weekend trip to Napa Valley, all under the guise of networking. Meanwhile, I was eating takeout pizza on my workbench, trying to figure out a complex joinery problem. I felt a small pang of, not jealousy exactly, but a sense of disconnect. Our lives, once so intertwined, were starting to diverge. He was living the high life of a CEO while I was still just the craftsman, the gal in the trenches, but I pushed that feeling down. This was the division of labor we'd agreed to. This was the partnership. He was doing his job and I was doing mine. I told myself his success was my success. The first real red flag, the one that made my stomach clench, involved our lumber supplier, a man named Gus. Gus was an old-school guy, ran a family mill, and we'd been with him since day one. He'd extended us credit when we were nobodies, and I had a deep respect for him. One afternoon, Gus called me directly on my cell, which was unusual. He usually dealt with Ethan for all the invoicing. "Clara," he said, his voice gravelly and concerned, "I don't want to be a pain, but that last invoice, the big one for the hotel project, it's now 60 days past due. Ethan said the check was in the mail 3 weeks ago, but we haven't seen anything. Things are getting tight on my end." I was floored and embarrassed. "Gus, I am so sorry," I stammered. "I had no idea. I'll talk to Ethan right now and get this sorted out. We'll wire the money today." I hung up the phone, a cold knot forming in my gut. This wasn't like Ethan. He was sometimes a bit flashy, but he was always meticulous about paying our suppliers. Our reputation was built on reliability both in our craft and in our business dealings. I walked out of the workshop and into our small office where Ethan was on the phone laughing. He saw my face and his expression changed. He ended the call quickly. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told him about the call from Gus. He immediately became defensive. "Damn it," I told them the check was sent. "The Postal Service must have lost it. Or maybe their accounting department is just incompetent." He started typing furiously on his computer. "Look, don't worry about it. I'll cancel the old check and wire the money right now. See, problem solved." He showed me the confirmation screen for the wire transfer. It was seamless, efficient. He made me feel like I was overreacting, like I was the one who didn't understand how these minor hiccups happen in business. "You need to relax, Clara," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You handle the wood, I'll handle the money. We're a team, remember? I wanted to believe him. I really did. I let it go. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A few weeks later, a similar thing happened with our hardware provider. Another lost check. Another last-minute wire transfer after an angry phone call. Ethan had another plausible excuse. "Our bank is migrating systems. It's causing all sorts of electronic payment delays. It's a total nightmare." Each time he had an answer that was just believable enough to quell my rising anxiety. He was so confident, so dismissive of my concerns that he made me feel foolish for even asking. He was subtly gaslighting me, and I didn't even have the vocabulary for it at the time. I just knew that I felt increasingly uneasy. I started paying more attention. I noticed Ethan would take phone calls outside, his voice hushed. I saw credit card bills on his desk from companies I didn't recognize. When I asked, he'd say they were for web services or digital marketing things I didn't understand. He created a linguistic barrier between us using business jargon as a shield. He was the finance guy, the tech guy, the sales guy. I was just the wood gal. What did I know about Swift codes, SEO optimization, or Series B funding, a term he threw around once, making me feel like a complete amateur? This slow erosion of my confidence was his most effective tool. He made me feel like I was unqualified to question him. And the family dynamic didn't help. Whenever I'd voice a mild concern to our parents about Ethan's spending, my mom would wave it away. "Oh, Clara, you worry too much. That's what it takes to build a brand. Your brother has a vision. You have to trust him." My dad would just grunt in agreement. They trusted him, so why shouldn't I? Doubting Ethan felt like doubting our entire family. It felt like a betrayal. And so I stayed quiet, burying my concerns under another layer of sawdust and denial, hoping, praying that it was all in my head. The dam of my denial finally broke on a Tuesday. I remember the date, the 24th of October. It was a gray, drizzly Oregon afternoon, and the workshop was quiet. My team had gone home for the day, and I was staying late to put the finishing touches on a particularly complex custom bookshelf. I was in my element, focused and calm. That's when my phone rang. It was a woman named Maria from Prestige Design Logistics, the shipping company we used for all our high-end white glove deliveries across the country. I expected it to be a routine call to coordinate a pickup. I was wrong. Her voice was polite but firm. "Miss Evans," she said, "I'm calling about the outstanding balance on your account. It's currently at just over $32,000, and we have a number of invoices that are over 90 days past due. We've spoken with Ethan several times, and he's made repeated promises of payment, but we've yet to receive anything. At this point, we've had to place a hold on your account. We won't be able to schedule any more shipments, including the large one for the Scottsdale project, until the balance is cleared." The chisel in my hand clattered to the floor. $32,000. A hold on our account. The Scottsdale project was a huge deal, a custom library for a tech millionaire. The pieces were finished, polished, and sitting in my workshop, taking up half the floor space. They were due to ship out that Friday. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Ethan handles all the payments. He told me everything was current." "I understand," she replied, a hint of weariness in her tone that told me she'd had this exact conversation before. "But from our end, the account is severely delinquent. I can email you the detailed statement if you'd like." "Yes," I said, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "Yes, please. Send it to my personal email." I gave her the address and hung up. For a full minute I just stood there, staring at the bookshelf, the beautiful, solid object I had created with my own two hands. It was real. It was honest. But the foundation of the business that sold it suddenly felt like quicksand. I walked on shaky legs to the office, my dusty work boots feeling heavy as lead. I sat down at my computer, the one I rarely used for anything besides looking up design ideas, and opened my email. There it was, an email from Maria. The subject line read, "Account Statement, Timber and Soul." My hand trembled as I clicked it open. The PDF loaded a sterile black and white ledger of failure. Invoice after invoice, marked in bold red, 90+ days past due. I scrolled down, my blood running cold. It wasn't just one or two missed payments, it was a pattern. A long, consistent pattern of non-payment stretching back nearly a year. How was this possible? We were more profitable than ever. The money was coming in. I'd seen the sales reports Ethan proudly showed me. Where was it going? A dark thought, an ugly suspicion I had been suppressing for months forced its way to the surface. I opened our shared business drive and navigated to the accounting folder. It was Ethan's domain, a place I had never felt the need to enter. It was password protected. Of course it was. I tried the obvious ones: Timber, Soul, Ethan, 1, 2, 3, our dad's birthday. Nothing. Frustration and panic began to bubble up inside me. Then I remembered something from years ago when we first set up the business. For our shared passwords, we used the name of the dog we had as kids, a scruffy mutt named Chewy, followed by the year we built that ridiculous treehouse. I typed it in Chewy 1998. Access granted. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was violating his privacy. But the phone call from the shipping company had armed me with a terrifying new sense of purpose. I had to know. The folder was filled with spreadsheets, profit and loss statements, and bank records. I started with the main business checking account. I downloaded the statements for the past 2 years. At first, everything looked normal. I saw the big deposits from clients, the payments to our suppliers, or so I thought, the payroll for our employees. But as I looked closer, I started to notice things that didn't add up. There were large, recurring monthly payments to a credit card I didn't recognize, an American Express Platinum card. Our official company card was a simple Visa with a modest limit. Who had this, Amex? Then I saw the transfers. Thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, being moved from our main business account to a second account at a different bank. The memo line for these transfers was always something vague. Marketing expenses, consulting fees, or investor distributions. We didn't have any investors. It was just me and him. My heart was hammering. This couldn't be happening. There had to be an explanation, a logical reason. Maybe he'd opened a new account for tax purposes. Maybe he'd hired consultants without telling me. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the knot in my stomach told me I was lying to myself. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that shattered my world, was a folder labeled E. Evans Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of it. I clicked it open. It contained a single document, the Articles of Incorporation for a limited liability company. The sole member listed was Ethan Evans, my brother. The address listed was a P.O. box in a town 30 miles away. With trembling fingers, I went back to the bank statements for our main account. I cross-referenced the dates of the large transfers with the deposits into this new mysterious LLC. They matched. Every single one. For nearly 2 years, Ethan had been systematically transferring huge sums of our company's money into his own personal shell company. I started adding them up on a calculator, my breath catching in my throat with every new entry. The numbers on the screen climbed higher and higher. $10,000 here. $25,000 there. A massive $75,000 transfer 6 months ago labeled Capital Equipment Purchase. I knew for a fact we hadn't purchased any new equipment. When I hit the equals button, the final number stared back at me from the screen. It felt unreal, like a number from a different world. It didn't feel like my money, our money. It felt like a score in a video game. $814. $257.31. Over $800,000. Gone. Stolen. Betrayed. I pushed my chair back from the desk and stumbled out of the office, gasping for air. I leaned against a finished cherry wood credenza, the smooth, cool surface, a stark contrast to the fire raging inside me. I felt nauseous. The whole workshop, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a crime scene. Every piece of furniture, every tool, every speck of sawdust was a monument to my stupidity, to my blind trust. The years of 18-hour days, the missed holidays, the calloused hands, the sacrifices. What for? So my brother could live a lie. So he could steal the soul right out of the business we'd named together. I thought back to his fancy car, his expensive suits, his networking trips. It wasn't for the business. It was for him. Funded by my sweat and my work. The American dream had become my personal nightmare. And in that moment, standing alone in the silent workshop, I knew 2 things for certain. First, my relationship with my brother was over. And second, this was not going to be a quiet family dispute. This was going to be a war. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark office, the glow of the monitor illuminating the damning numbers, a silent testament to the scale of the betrayal. Each digit felt like a knife twisting in my gut. How could he do this? This wasn't a stranger. This was Ethan. The same Ethan who helped me with my homework, who defended me from bullies, who stood beside me as the maid of honor at my wedding. The memories, once a source of warmth, now felt like cruel jokes, scenes from a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. By the time the sun rose, casting long, mournful shadows across the workshop floor, my grief had hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I was going to confront him. I waited until I heard him arrive, his cheerful whistle cutting through the morning quiet as he walked into the office. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee just like he did every morning. The sheer normalcy of the gesture made me feel sick. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, placing a cup on my desk. He paused, finally noticing the look on my face, the dark circles under my eyes, the stiffness in my posture. Whoa. Rough night. He looked terrible. I didn't say anything. I just swiveled my monitor around to face him. On the screen was the spreadsheet I had created, the one that detailed every single fraudulent transfer, every date, every amount, culminating in that hideous final number. He glanced at it, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, and then recognition. The blood drained from his face. The charming, confident mask he wore every day dissolved, and for a split second I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Pure, unadulterated panic. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a practiced calm and unsettling nonchalance. "Oh, that," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. He actually chuckled. "Clara, you've been digging around in things you don't understand. This is just some creative accounting. Moving assets around for tax purposes, minimizing our liability. It's complex stuff." Creative accounting. I finally found my voice, and it was a low, dangerous growl I barely recognized as my own. "It's called Evans Holdings, LLC, Ethan. I saw the incorporation papers. That's not the company's name. That's your name." "Where is the money?" He sighed, a long, theatrical sigh, as if I were a child he had to explain a difficult concept to. "Okay, look. It's not what you think. It's a supplementary executive compensation fund. I'm the face of this company, the one making the deals, the one working 24/7 to build our brand. My contribution is different than yours. We talked about this. I needed to be compensated accordingly." Compensated. My voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "We agreed to a 50/50th split on profits. We take the same salary. That was the deal. We never not once talked about an $800,000 executive compensation fund. You've been lying to me for years." He started to get angry then, his defensiveness turning into aggression. "Lying. I've been building this empire while you've been playing with wood chips. Do you have any idea? The pressure I'm under, the people I have to deal with, the image I have to maintain. That car, those suits, those dinners, that's not for me, it's for Timber and Soul. You wouldn't have a business. Without me, we have suppliers who haven't been paid in months," I shouted. Standing up so fast my chair flew back and hit the wall. "We have a shipping hold that's about to cost us our biggest client. Where is the money, Ethan? What did you spend it on?" He threw his hands up in the air. "It was an investment. I was making plays, moving money around to make more money. High risk, high reward stuff. Some of it didn't pan out. It's the cost of doing business, Clara. You have to spend money to make money. It wasn't your money to spend." The dam of my rage finally broke. "It was our money, the company's money, my money. You stole from me. You stole from our employees. You stole from the dream we built together." The look on his face changed. The false bravado melted away, and what was left was ugly and raw. It was a sneer of pure entitlement. You know what, Clara? Maybe I did. And maybe you deserved it. I'm the one with the vision, the talent. You're just the hired help. A glorified carpenter. Without me, you'd still be in Dad's garage building bookshelves for $50. I made you. That money, I earned it. I was just taking what was mine. That was it. That was the moment my brother died and a stranger took his place. The words hung in the air between us, poisonous and irreversible. Everything went quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of a saw starting up in the workshop, it all faded away. There was nothing left but his sneering face and the chasm that had just opened up between us. I thought that was the worst it could get. I was wrong. That evening, I went to my parents' house. I needed them. I needed my mom and dad to see the truth, to help me fix this, to help me reach the brother I thought I knew. I sat them down in the living room, the same living room filled with furniture I had built for them, and I laid it all out. I showed them the bank statements, the LLC documents, everything. I expected shock, anger at Ethan, concern for me. Instead, I was met with a deeply unsettling silence. My mom, Mary, wrung her hands, her eyes darting between me and my father. My dad, Richard, stared at the papers, his jaw tight, his face unreadable. There has to be an explanation, my mom said, finally, her voice trembling. Ethan wouldn't do this. He loves you. He loves this family. Mom, this is the explanation, I said, my voice pleading. The proof is right here. He admitted it to me this morning. He said he deserved it. My dad finally looked up at me, and his eyes weren't filled with sympathy. They were filled with disappointment. In me. So you snooped around his private files. Behind his back, he asked, his voice cold. What brought this on, Clara? Were you jealous? Did you see the success he was having, the way he was leading the company, and you couldn't handle it? I felt like I had been slapped. Jealous, Dad. He stole almost $1 million. He's run the company into the ground. Your brother is a brilliant businessman, my dad said, standing up. Maybe his methods are a little unconventional. Maybe he took some risks that didn't pay off. But to accuse him of being a common thief, that's a low blow, Clara. He's your brother. Just then the front door opened and Ethan walked in. He must have known I'd come here. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had managed to produce tears. He ran to our mom and hugged her. I can't believe she's doing this, he sobbed into her shoulder. I made 1 or 2 bad investments, I admit it. I was trying to grow the business for us, for our family, and now she's trying to ruin me. My mom held him tight, glaring at me over his shoulder. Shame on you, Clara. Kicking your brother when he's down. It was a nightmare. They had completely reframed the narrative. In their eyes, Ethan was the ambitious visionary who made a mistake, and I was the jealous, petty sister who was trying to tear him down. He had gotten to them first. He had spun his story, painting himself as the victim. He knew exactly which buttons to push, how to play on their preconceived notions of us. He, the golden boy with the grand ideas. I, the simple plodding worker who couldn't see the big picture. You have a choice to make, I said, my voice hollow, looking at my parents as they coddled the man who had robbed me. You can believe the lies of a thief, or you can look at the undeniable proof in front of you. My father walked over to me, his face a mask of stone. The only choice I see here is for you to apologize to your brother and figure out a way to fix this as a family quietly. You will not bring shame on this house. I looked from my father's cold eyes to my mother's tear-streaked face as she stroked Ethan's hair. I looked at Ethan, who shot me a look of pure triumph over her shoulder. And I knew. I was utterly and completely alone. They had made their choice. They chose him. My family wasn't a refuge. It was a part of the crime. No, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I won't fix this quietly. I stood up and walked to the door. I turned back one last time. I'm going to do this the right way. I'm taking him to court. The look of horror on my parents' faces was almost worth it. Almost. As I walked out into the cold night air, leaving the family I knew behind, I wasn't just fighting for my money or my business anymore. I was fighting for the truth, and I would do it even if it meant I had to burn everything to the ground. Walking away from my parents' house that night was like stepping off a cliff. The free fall was terrifying. For my entire life, my family, for all its subtle fractures and unspoken biases, had been my anchor. Now the rope had been cut. I drove for hours with no destination, the angry, hurt voices from that living room echoing in my head. "Shame on you, Clara. He's your brother. You will not bring shame on this house." It was a coordinated assault, a psychological wall built to protect their cherished narrative, the one where Ethan was the star and I was the supporting cast. To admit I was right would be to admit their golden boy was a fraud, and that their judgment had been flawed for decades. It was easier to make me the villain. The next few days were a blur of numb disbelief and frantic damage control. I went back to the workshop, which now felt haunted and had the locks changed. That act alone, so simple and final, felt like a declaration of war. I had to face my team, the handful of loyal apprentices who looked up to me. I couldn't tell them the whole truth, not yet. I just said that Ethan and I were parting ways due to irreconcilable differences in business strategy. They were confused, but they trusted me. Seeing that trust in their eyes was both a comfort and a crushing weight. I was now solely responsible for their livelihoods, and I was at the helm of a sinking ship. The calls started coming in. First, the hotel developers furious that their custom furniture was being held hostage by our shipping dispute. Then other clients asking for updates on orders. The financial rot Ethan had hidden was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just our suppliers. He had also been taking large deposits for new projects and funneling that cash into his shell LLC, instead of using it to buy materials. We were legally obligated to fulfill orders for which we had no money and no raw materials. We were insolvent. The word itself sounded like a disease. Timber and soul, my life's work was on life support, and my own brother was the one pulling the plug. I tried to handle it myself. I spent hours on the phone begging suppliers for patience, trying to renegotiate terms with clients, attempting to move money around just to stop the bleeding. It was hopeless. I was a craftsman, not a crisis manager. Every conversation was a new humiliation, another reminder of how thoroughly I had been betrayed. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I was just a ghost haunting the ruins of my own dream, fueled by black coffee and rage. The breaking point came when I received a formal notice of eviction from our workshop's landlord. The rent was 3 months overdue. Ethan naturally had been handling that too. I was sitting in the dark office, holding the letter, and I just broke. For the first time since this nightmare began, I put my head in my hands and sobbed. Not quiet tears, but gut-wrenching, soul-tearing sobs of a woman who had lost everything. My business, my life savings, my brother, my family, all of it gone. It was in that moment of absolute despair that my best friend Chloe found me. She was a landscape architect, sharp and fiercely loyal, and she had been friends with both me and Ethan since college. She'd been calling and texting for days, worried because I'd gone silent. When I didn't answer, she drove to the workshop using the spare key I'd given her years ago. She found me in the office, a complete wreck. She didn't say anything at first. She just came over, wrapped her arms around my shaking shoulders, and held me. Her presence was a small, warm light in an endless darkness. When I could finally speak, the whole sordid story came pouring out of me, the transfers, the LLC, the confrontation, the way my parents had sided with him. I told her everything. When I was done, she pulled back, her eyes blazing with a fury that for the first time matched my own. "That absolute son of a bitch," she whispered. "And your parents. Clara, I am so sorry. So sorry." She looked at the eviction notice in my hand. Okay, crying time is over. We're not letting him win. You are not going down like this. What am I supposed to do, Chloe? I asked, my voice hoarse. It's over. I'm ruined. He's protected by an LLC, my parents are on his side, and I have a mountain of debt that isn't even mine. No, she said, her voice firm, resolute. You are not ruined. You are a victim of a crime. And what do victims of crimes do? They fight back. You said you were going to take him to court. Were you serious? I was, I said, but how I can't even afford to pay my rent, let alone hire some high-powered lawyer to go up against my brother, who now has $800,000 of my money to defend himself with. Chloe was already on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. My cousin, you remember Sarah? She's a litigator. A shark. She specializes in business fraud and partnership disputes. I'm calling her right now. We'll ask for a consultation. Many lawyers like her work on contingency for cases this clear-cut, or they'll work out a payment plan. We have to try. The idea of taking this family mess into a legal setting felt daunting, terrifying. It made it real in a way that shouting in my parents' living room hadn't. It meant depositions, discovery, a judge. It meant turning our family's dirty laundry into a public record. But looking at the eviction notice, thinking of my apprentices and remembering the triumphant sneer on Ethan's face, what other choice did I have? Letting him get away with it was not an option. It would be a betrayal of myself, of everyone who had ever believed in me. The next day, I was sitting in a sleek downtown law office that smelled of leather and success. Sarah, Chloe's cousin, was everything Chloe had promised. She was in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of confidence that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. I spent 2 hours laying out the entire story, spreading my meticulously organized bank statements and documents across her vast mahogany desk. She listened intently, her expression unreadable, asking pointed questions, interrupting me only to clarify a date or a number. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Well, Miss Evans, she said, her voice calm and measured. This is one of the most flagrant cases of breach of fiduciary duty and outright embezzlement I've seen in a long time. The paper trail is clean, your brother's attempt to hide the money in a shell. LLC is amateurish at best, and his defense that this was executive compensation is laughable without a single piece of documentation or board resolution to support it. A tiny flicker of hope ignited within me. So, you think I have a case? Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator. Miss Evans, you don't just have a case, you have a slam dunk. This won't be easy, and it's going to get ugly. Family law, even in a business context, is brutal. They will try to destroy your character. They will call you jealous, incompetent, greedy. They will use your own parents against you. It's a scorched earth tactic. My question for you is not whether we can win. It's whether you have the stomach to see it through to the end. I thought about my workshop, my team, my name. I thought about the years of work I had poured into building something real, something honest. I thought about the man who wore my brother's face and called me hired help. I looked Sarah dead in the eye. I do, I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. Let's burn it all down. The moment I hired Sarah, the conflict transformed. It was no longer a messy, emotional family drama. It became a structured, methodical war fought not with shouting matches, but with legal documents and strategic maneuvers. The first shot fired was a formal complaint filed with the county court, a document dozens of pages long that detailed every accusation citing breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and civil theft. The legal language was cold and brutal, stripping away the tangled emotions and leaving only the stark facts of the case. Serving Ethan with that lawsuit felt like crossing the Rubicon. There was no going back. As expected, the blowback from my family was immediate and severe. My mother called me, her voice hysterical, accusing me of trying to send my own brother to jail. Sarah had explained that our civil suit was separate from any potential criminal charges, but that distinction was lost on my parents. My father sent a single curt email: "You have made your choice. You are no longer welcome in our home. Do not contact us again." I was officially an outcast, excommunicated for the crime of seeking justice. The pain of that was sharp and constant, a dull ache behind my ribs. But with Sarah and Chloe at my back, I felt a new strength. My grief was now a fuel. Ethan, armed with my stolen money, hired a slick, expensive lawyer from a big downtown firm. Their first move was to file a motion to dismiss, claiming this was merely a partnership dispute that should be handled in private arbitration, not a public courtroom. They painted me as a disgruntled partner trying to leverage the legal system for a bigger buyout. Sarah eviscerated their motion in her response, pointing out that partnership disputes don't typically involve shell corporations and nearly $1 million in missing funds. The judge agreed with her, and the case was set for trial. It was a small, early victory, but it felt monumental. Then came the discovery phase, and this was where things got truly ugly. Discovery is the legal process where both sides are forced to share all relevant information. It meant depositions, interrogatories, and requests for documents. It was a systematic excavation of our entire lives, and Ethan's legal team used it as a weapon to harass and intimidate me. They requested every email I had ever sent, every text message, my personal bank statements, my tax returns from the last 10 years. They were on a fishing expedition, looking for anything they could use to paint me as unstable, incompetent, or financially desperate. My deposition was brutal. I spent 8 hours in a soulless conference room sitting across a table from Ethan's smirking lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne. Ethan was there too, sitting in the corner watching me with cold, dead eyes. Thorne's questions were designed to trip me up, to make me look foolish. "Miss Evans," he'd ask in a condescending drawl, "is it true you never once reviewed the company's monthly profit and loss statements?" Ethan told me he was handling it. I'd reply, "So you, a 50% owner of a multi-million-dollar company, simply didn't bother to look at the finances. You just abdicated your responsibility entirely. Would you call that diligent ownership?" He twisted my trust into negligence. He framed my focus on my craft as a dereliction of duty. He brought up every minor disagreement Ethan and I had ever had, trying to create a narrative of a long-simmering jealousy on my part. He tried to get me angry, to make me lose my composure. But Sarah had prepared me. "Stick to the facts, Clara," she had coached me. "Never speculate. Never get emotional. Just be a broken record. The documents speak for themselves." So I did. I sat there calm and collected and repeated the facts, pointing back to the bank statements, the transfers, the LLC. By the end of the day, I was emotionally exhausted, but I hadn't cracked. The real bombshells came when we got our hands on Ethan's records. Sarah had subpoenaed everything: his personal bank accounts, his credit card statements, phone records. What we found was staggering. The $800,000 hadn't just been spent on cars and suits. That was just the tip of the iceberg. Ethan was living a complete double life. There were charges for thousands of dollars on lavish trips I never knew about: Vegas, Miami, even a week in Monaco. There were rent payments on a luxury apartment downtown that he'd apparently been keeping as a private getaway. There were wire transfers to online gambling sites totaling over $100,000. But the most sickening discovery was the payments. Regular monthly payments of $5,000 to a woman whose name I didn't recognize. A little digging revealed she was a single mother living in a nearby city. Phone records showed hundreds of calls and texts between her and Ethan. He wasn't just a thief. He was a cheater carrying on a long-term affair using our company's money to fund a secret second life. He had betrayed not just me but his wife, a sweet woman named Jessica who had been nothing but kind to me. Sarah and I debated the ethics of using this information. Legally, she said it's relevant. It shows a pattern of deceit and provides a motive for the theft. It demolishes his business expenses excuse. But it's also a nuclear option. It will destroy his marriage and make this even more personal and vicious. I thought about Jessica. I thought about their 2 young kids. But then I thought about Ethan's sneer when he called me hired help. I thought about my parents choosing him over me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the truth, the complete, unvarnished, ugly truth. Use it, I said, my voice hard. He built this life on a foundation of lies. It's time to kick out the pillars. The depositions of my parents were the lowest point. Sarah had to subpoena them as they refused to cooperate voluntarily. Seeing them walk into that conference room, sitting on the opposite side of the table, flanked by Ethan's lawyer, was one of the most painful experiences of my life. They were there to testify on Ethan's behalf, my own parents. My father, under oath, described me as a talented but simple woman, someone who lacked the vision for business, and who had always been a bit envious of her brother's natural charisma. My mother tearfully recounted how Ethan was the heart of the company, the one who poured everything he had into its success, and that this lawsuit was just a terrible misunderstanding blown out of proportion by my jealousy. Thorne led them through a carefully crafted series of questions that made it sound like they were privy to the inner workings of the company, that they had witnessed my supposed incompetence firsthand. Sarah, on cross-examination, was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Evans," she asked, "My mom, were you ever an employee of Timber and Soul?" "No," my mom said. "Were you ever a signatory on their bank account's number? Have you ever seen a profit and loss statement for the company?" "No, but Ethan would tell us how well things were going." "So to be clear," Sarah summarized, "your entire understanding of the company's finances and your daughter Clara's role in it is based solely on what your son Ethan told you," my mother faltered, realizing the trap. "He wouldn't lie to us," she whispered. It was devastating to watch. They weren't malicious people. They were just blinded by their love for their favored son, incapable of seeing the monster he had become. They had built their family's identity around the myth of Ethan the prodigy, and they would perjure themselves to protect it. As I sat there listening to my own mother and father assassinate my character under oath to protect a thief, I finally understood. The family I had been grieving was already dead. It had been for a long time. I just hadn't been able to see it. As we moved closer to the trial date, the case felt like it was consuming my entire world. My life became a cycle of meetings with Sarah, reviewing documents and trying desperately to keep the skeletal remains of my business afloat. I had to let my apprentices go, a decision that felt like a personal failure, but I promised them I would hire them back the moment I could. I was operating as a one-woman shop again, just like in the beginning, taking on small repair jobs and custom commissions, just to pay my personal bills and the workshop's utilities. The place was cavernous and quiet without my team, the silence, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. The stress was relentless. I lost weight. Sleep was a luxury, and my passion for woodworking, once my greatest joy, now felt like a chore tainted by the battle it was a part of. Ethan's legal team, led by the relentless Marcus Thorne, was throwing every possible obstacle in our path. They filed motion after motion, trying to delay the trial, trying to have key evidence thrown out. Thorne argued that Ethan's affair and gambling debts were prejudicial and irrelevant to the financial dispute. He claimed they would unfairly bias a jury against his client. My client's personal life has no bearing on his business acumen or the compensation arrangements he made with his sister, he argued in a pre-trial hearing. It was a bold-faced lie, but he said it with such conviction you could almost believe him. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Miller, thankfully saw through most of it, but she did agree to place limits on how much of the affair could be discussed in court, ruling that we could use it to demonstrate motive for needing money but not to delve into the salacious details. Just when I thought we had a clear path to victory, Thorne played his trump card. A week before the trial was set to begin, they produced a new piece of evidence, a sworn affidavit from a man named David Chen, a former business consultant who had briefly worked with us a few years back. In the affidavit, Chen claimed he had been present at a meeting where I had verbally agreed to give Ethan a discretionary bonus pool to use for aggressive marketing and brand development. He swore under oath that I had said something to the effect of, "I don't care about the numbers, Ethan. You do what you have to do to make us successful. I trust you." It was a complete fabrication. I remembered David Chen. We had hired him for a month to help us streamline our initial online presence, and then let him go. The meeting he described never happened, but his story was terrifyingly plausible. It fit perfectly with the narrative they had been building. Clara, the naive craftsman who didn't care about the business side of things, giving her savvy brother carte blanche. "He's lying," I told Sarah, my hands shaking as I read the affidavit. "This is perjury." "Why would he do this?" Sarah's face was grim. "People lie for money, Clara." I did a little digging. Chen's consulting business went bankrupt last year. He's desperate. I'd bet my license that Ethan paid him, and paid him well for this testimony. "But can we prove that?" "It will be difficult," she admitted. "It'll be his word against yours. And he's a so-called neutral third party. This hurts us. It muddies the water. All a jury needs is a little reasonable doubt, and this guy's testimony could give it to them." This was Ethan's masterstroke. He hadn't just stolen my money. He was now trying to steal my reality, manufacturing a false history and paying people to swear it was true. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. For the first time, I felt a genuine flicker of fear that we could lose. All my proof, all those bank statements, they showed that the money was taken. But Chen's testimony provided a potential, albeit false, reason why. It was a crack in our slam-dunk case. The news sent me into a tailspin. Chloe found me that night in the workshop trying to sand a piece of walnut, my movements jerky and imprecise. I was ruining the wood. She gently took the sandpaper from my hand. "Talk to me, Clara," she said softly. I told her about the affidavit, about the sickening feeling that Ethan was always one step ahead, that his willingness to lie, cheat, and bribe gave him an advantage I couldn't match. "How do you fight someone who has no rules?" I asked, my voice filled with despair. "He'll burn the whole world down to get what he wants. He's using my money to pay people to lie about me. It's insane." Chloe listened patiently. When I was done, she put her hands on my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. "Yes, he will. But you have something he doesn't. The truth. And you're not a carpenter, Clara. You're a craftsman. You take what's rough and messy and you find the truth in it. You find the grain, the heart of the wood. You're going to do the same thing on that witness stand. You're going to show them the truth." Her words, her unwavering belief in me were like a lifeline. She was right. I couldn't control Ethan's lies, but I could control my own story. I had to trust that the truth presented simply and honestly would be more powerful than his web of deceit. The twist, the real turning point that came to our rescue, arrived from the most unexpected of places. 3 days before the trial, Sarah got a call. It was from a woman who introduced herself as Jessica Evans, Ethan's wife. "I need to speak with you," Jessica said, her voice quiet but firm. "I have something you need to see." They met that afternoon at a neutral location, a small coffee shop. I wasn't there, but Sarah called me the second, she left her voice electric with excitement. Apparently Jessica had been suspicious of Ethan for months. His late nights, his secretive phone calls, his lavish spending, it didn't add up. The notice for his deposition and our lawsuit was the final straw. She had started doing her own digging, and she had found it. Tucked away in a shoebox in the back of Ethan's home office closet was a second laptop. A personal laptop he thought she didn't know the password to. But she did. It was the name of their firstborn child. On that laptop she found everything. There was a secret email account. In it, Sarah found the email chain between Ethan and David Chen. It was all there in black and white. Ethan offering Chen $25,000 in cash in exchange for his creative recollection of our business dealings. Chen haggling for 30, Ethan agreeing. It was a clear, undeniable conspiracy to commit perjury. But that wasn't all. Jessica had also found a folder of financial documents. It seemed Ethan was even dumber than we thought. He had kept a detailed record of his gambling. More importantly, he had drafted a letter to his mistress. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying letter written in the early days after I'd filed the suit. In it, he confessed everything. He admitted to taking the money, told her he was trying to build a nest egg so they could run away together. He complained about me calling me a talentless hack who was holding him back. And most damningly, he wrote, Clara was always so trusting, so naive. She never once looked at the books. It was like taking candy from a baby. Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement over the phone. It's the smoking gun, Clara. All of it. The conspiracy with Chen, the confession letter. We have him. We have him dead to rights. His entire defense just went up in flames. Jessica had agreed to testify. She was done with the lies, done with the betrayal. She was filing for divorce and was going to make sure Ethan couldn't hide any assets from her or their children. His web of deceit hadn't just ensnared me. It had caught his own family, and the person he thought he had fooled the most was now the one who was going to bring him down. Walking into that courthouse on the first day of the trial, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a year. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. Ethan could bring his paid-for witnesses, his slick lawyers, his disappointed parents. It didn't matter anymore. I had the one thing that was more powerful than all of his lies. I had the truth. And now I had the proof to back it up. The courtroom felt like a different world. The air was thick with a kind of heavy, formal silence broken only by coughs and the rustling of papers. The dark wood paneling on the walls reminded me of a coffin. On one side of the aisle sat me, Chloe, and Sarah's legal team. On the other side sat Ethan, his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, and, to my unending sorrow, my parents. They sat right behind him, a united front, their faces set like stone. They refused to even look at me. It was a physical manifestation of the chasm between us. The first few days of the trial were a slow, methodical process. Jury selection, opening statements. Sarah's opening was brilliant. She painted a simple, powerful picture of a sister and brother, a shared dream and a devastating betrayal. She laid out the facts of the case, clearly promising the jury that the evidence would be undeniable. Thorne's opening, by contrast, was all smoke and mirrors. He portrayed Ethan as the visionary engine of the company, and me as the disgruntled but necessary craftsman. He introduced the idea of the discretionary bonus pool, setting the stage for his star witness, David Chen. When I took the stand, my heart was pounding, but I remembered Chloe's words. Find the grain. Show them the truth. Sarah walked me through my story from our childhood to the creation of Timber and Soul to the day I discovered the theft. I spoke simply, honestly. I didn't embellish or get overly emotional. I just told them what happened. I described my love for the craft, the pride I took in my work, and the absolute trust I had placed in my brother. Then came the cross-examination. Marcus Thorne approached me like a wolf circling its prey. He was aggressive, condescending, and relentless. He grilled me about my lack of financial oversight, attempting to portray me as a negligent fool who was now trying to blame her brilliant brother for her own ignorance. "Miss," Evans Thorne said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you want this jury to believe that for 5 years, as your company grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, you never once thought to ask for, say, a bank statement or a quarterly report." "I trusted my brother," I said calmly. "You trusted him," Thorne repeated, turning to the jury with a disbelieving smirk. "Or was it that you simply weren't capable of understanding the complexities of a modern business, and you were happy to let your brother handle the hard part while you played with your tools?" The insult was designed to provoke me, but I held my ground. "I'm a master craftsman," I said, looking directly at the jury. "I know everything about the product that made our company successful. I trusted my partner to be an expert in his role just as he trusted me in mine. That's what a partnership island, it's built on trust." The tide of the trial began to turn when they called their key witness, David Chen. He walked to the stand with a practiced confidence, a man who clearly believed he was untouchable. He delivered his rehearsed lies, perfectly describing the fictitious meeting where I had supposedly given Ethan free rein with the company's finances. He was a convincing liar. I could see some of the jurors looking at me with new doubt in their eyes. Thorne looked smug, believing he had just planted the seeds of reasonable doubt. During Sarah's cross-examination, she was masterful. She started gently asking Chen about his failed business, his financial troubles. Then she moved in for the kill. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice sharp, "are you familiar with an email account by the name of, quote, e.visionary22@gmail.com? Chen paled. I don't recall." "You don't recall?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps this will jog your memory." She placed a document on the projector. It was the email chain from Ethan's secret laptop. The jury could now read the entire exchange, Ethan's offer of $25,000 for his testimony, Chen haggling for $30,000. It was all there. "Miss Chen," Sarah said, her voice like ice, "isn't it true that you are not testifying about your memory, but rather you are testifying from a script that Miss Evans paid you $30,000 to recite? Isn't it true that you are committing perjury right now under oath?" Chen began to sweat profusely. He stammered, he denied, but the damage was done. His credibility was utterly destroyed. Thorne's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. The final, devastating blow came the next day. The moment Sarah called her final witness, a wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. The plaintiff calls Jessica Evans to the stand. Ethan whipped his head around his face, a mask of horror and disbelief. My parents gasped. Jessica walked to the stand with a quiet dignity that commanded the room's attention. She looked directly at the jury, her voice clear and steady, never once looking at her husband. Sarah gently guided her through her testimony. Jessica told the jury about finding the second laptop, about the secret life it revealed. And then Sarah produced the letter. The confession letter Ethan had written to his mistress. "Mrs. Evans," Sarah asked, "can you identify this document?" "Yes," Jessica said. "It's a letter my husband wrote. I found it on his computer." Sarah asked her to read a specific paragraph aloud. Jessica took a deep breath, and her voice, though trembling slightly, filled the courtroom. "Clara was always so trusting, so naive," she read. "She never once looked at the books. It was like taking candy from a baby. I had to take that money for us for our future. She was holding me back, and I took what was rightfully mine." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was over. I knew it in that instant. It was a direct confession in his own words. The arrogance, the entitlement, the admission of guilt, it was all there. I risked a glance at Ethan. He was slumped in his chair, his face ashen. He looked broken, defeated. For the first time, the charming mask was gone, and all that was left was a pathetic, hollow man. Then I looked at my parents. My mother was openly weeping, her hand covering her mouth in horror. My father was staring at Ethan, but the look in his eyes was different now. The stony disappointment was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening understanding. He was finally seeing his son for who he truly was. Not the visionary, not the golden boy, but a liar and a thief. The myth they had built their family around for 30 years had just crumbled to dust before their very eyes. As Jessica stepped down from the stand, my gaze met my father's across the courtroom. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a profound, bottomless well of shame and regret. It wasn't a victory. It didn't feel like a triumph. Seeing my family so completely shattered, seeing the truth detonate in the middle of all our lives, was just tragic. The trial had exposed the truth, yes, but that truth had burned everyone it touched. The closing arguments felt like the final somber notes of a funeral dirge. Sarah's summation was a masterclass in controlled, righteous anger. She wasn't just an attorney. She was a storyteller, weaving the cold, hard facts of the bank statements and the damning words of Ethan's own letter into a tapestry of calculated betrayal. She spoke of the sanctity of partnership, the trust between siblings, and how that sacred bond had been methodically desecrated for the sake of luxury cars, secret apartments, and a life built on a foundation of lies. She looked at the jury, her voice unwavering, and told them that their verdict was not just about awarding a monetary sum. It was about restoring a truth that had been maliciously buried. "The numbers on these pages represent more than dollars and cents," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "They represent years of Clara Evans's life, her sweat, her passion, her soul poured into a dream her own brother treated like a personal piggy bank. Today you have the power to return not just her money, but the stolen value of her life's work." In stark contrast, Marcus Thorne's closing was a frantic, desperate scramble. He knew the confession letter had sunk him, and he was trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. He attempted to pivot to frame the entire lawsuit as a tragic family melodrama, a simple misunderstanding twisted into a weapon by a jealous sister and a scorned wife. He portrayed Ethan not as a thief, but as a flawed visionary, a man who loved his family so much that he took risky shortcuts to provide for them. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. I watched the jurors' faces as he spoke. There was no sympathy, no contemplation. There was only a kind of weary impatience. They had seen the truth, and they were no longer interested in the fiction. He was playing to an empty theater. Then the performance was over. The judge, with a voice devoid of all emotion, gave her final instructions to the jury. I watched them file out a collection of 12 ordinary people who held the entire weight of my past, present, and future in their hands. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, and the courtroom was plunged into a silence that was louder than any sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of waiting, the sound of a life held in suspension. Chloe reached over and squeezed my hand, her warmth, a small anchor in the vast, cold ocean of uncertainty. Across the aisle, my parents and Ethan were ushered out by Thorne. My mother, her face, a crumpled mask of grief, seemed to have aged a decade in a single day. My father's stoicism had shattered, leaving behind the shell of a man defeated by a truth he had fought so hard to deny. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. To look at me would be to look at the living embodiment of his catastrophic failure as a father. Waiting for the verdict is a special kind of hell. It's a space outside of time where every minute stretches into an hour. We sat in the courthouse hallway, the hard bench, a poor substitute for solid ground. Chloe tried to make small talk, but the words just evaporated in the tense air. My mind was a maelstrom. What if Thorne's pathetic performance had planted a single seed of doubt? What if one juror believed him? What if, after all this, I lost? The financial implications were terrifying, but the thought of the world officially validating Ethan's narrative, that was a horror I couldn't bear. It would mean that the truth didn't matter. It would mean that my entire reality was a minority opinion. After what felt like an eternity but was in reality just under 2 hours, the bailiff emerged from the courtroom, his face an unreadable slate. "They have a verdict," he announced, and the words sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. We all shuffled back into the courtroom, taking our places like actors in the final scene of a play we hadn't rehearsed. My hands were shaking. My breath was shallow. This was it. The jury filed in their faces as serious as before. I remembered a tidbit I'd read online: if the jury won't make eye contact with the defendant, it's a bad sign for them. They didn't look at Ethan. They didn't look at me. They looked straight ahead, at the judge, at the flag, at nothing. The foreman, a woman with tired eyes, handed the folded paper to the clerk. The sound of the paper unfolding was like a crack of thunder in the silent room. The clerk cleared her throat, and the world seemed to slow down every syllable she uttered, hanging in the air for an eternity. On the first count, breach of contract, she began her voice a clinical drone. "In the case of Evans versus Evans, we, the jury, find for the plaintiff, Clara Evans." A single sharp breath escaped my lungs. It was the first wave. "On the second count, breach of fiduciary duty, we find for the plaintiff, Clara Evans." The second wave. Chloe's grip on my hand tightened. "On the third count, fraud, we find for the plaintiff, Clara Evans." Another wave, stronger, this time washing away some of the filth and the fear. "On the fourth and final count, civil theft, we find for the plaintiff, Clara Evans." It was a clean sweep. Complete and total vindication. A wave of relief so immense, so powerful, it threatened to pull me under. I felt my eyes burn with tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed for over a year. But the clerk wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued the jury awards, the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $814,257. She paused. "And punitive damages in the amount of $750,000 for a total award of $1,564,257. A strangled gasp, a sound of profound pain came from my mother's direction. I didn't look. I couldn't. The number was staggering, far more than I had expected. Punitive damages were the jury's way of punishing Ethan, of saying that his actions were so malicious, so wantonly destructive, that simply repaying the debt was not enough. It was a moral judgment, a condemnation shouted from the jury box. I finally risked a glance across the aisle. Ethan was completely still, his face white, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He was no longer a charismatic CEO or a cunning adversary. He was just a man who had gambled everything on a series of lies and lost spectacularly. He was nothing. The victory, when it finally settled, didn't feel like a celebration. There was no elation, no desire to cheer. As we walked out of the courtroom, past the broken remnants of my family, I just felt empty. A deep, hollow sadness. I had won the lawsuit. I had reclaimed the truth. But I had been forced to burn down my own family home to do it, and I was left standing alone in the ashes. The aftermath was a slow, grinding process. The judgment wasn't a magic check. It was a legal weapon that set in motion a series of brutal, unavoidable consequences. Ethan, unable to pay, was forced to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The court appointed a trustee who took control of his life, seizing everything of value. The sleek German car was repossessed. The luxury downtown apartment, his secret lair, was liquidated, its contents sold at auction. His half of the business, our business, was now a worthless asset in a bankrupt estate, which I eventually bought back for pennies on the dollar from the court. It was a grim bureaucratic dismantling of a life, and I had been the one to initiate it. His personal life imploded with equal finality. The local business journal ran a feature on the case detailing the fraud, the affair, the gambling. Our family name, the one my father had held in such high esteem, was now synonymous with scandal. Jessica, armed with the evidence from the trial, filed for a swift and merciless divorce, securing full custody of their children and moving 1,000 miles away to start over, erasing him from their lives as thoroughly as the court was. Erasing his assets. Through all of this, my parents remained silent. They didn't call to rage, or to cry, or to apologize. They simply vanished from my life. I heard through a cousin that they had taken out a second mortgage on their home, the home I grew up in, filled with furniture I had built to help Ethan with his legal fees and basic living expenses. Their blind devotion, their commitment to the fiction, persisted even after the story had been publicly and irrevocably debunked. They had chosen their son, and they would go down with his ship. My own rebuilding was a solitary, arduous task. The first check from the bankruptcy trustee didn't arrive for months. In the meantime, I was a woman adrift. The workshop, once my sanctuary, felt like a tomb. I would walk through it, the silence of the unused machines deafening, and feel the phantom pains of my old life. But I had made a promise. The day the first significant portion of the money cleared, I didn't buy myself anything. I sat down with a list of phone numbers, took a deep breath, and started to call my old team. The relief in their voices, the sound of hope returning, was the first real reward I had received. That was the day the healing began. That was the day I started to sweep the ashes away and look for the foundation underneath. My father's apology, when it came a year later, was a strange and unsettling event. He didn't call. He just appeared a ghost from a past life. Standing in the wide doorway of the workshop I was slowly, painstakingly resurrecting. He was thinner, grayer, the confident posture I remembered from my childhood, now stooped with the weight of a shame he could no longer deny. He watched me work for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us filled with the hum of the bandsaw and the unspoken history of our broken family. When he finally spoke about the new sign, Evans Legacy Craftsmanship, his voice was a fragile, raspy thing. It was a name I had chosen in a moment of complicated emotion, a tribute to the idealized memory of the father who taught me to love wood, and a reclamation of a name his son had dragged through the mud. His apology was not the cathartic release I might have once dreamed of. The words, "I was wrong, Clara. I am so sorry," were the ones I had desperately needed to hear in that sterile conference room in his living room in the cold courtroom. But now they felt like rain on a field that had already turned to dust. They couldn't make anything grow again. I saw in his eyes a man grappling with a devastating truth. He had sacrificed his relationship with one daughter to protect a fantasy of a son, and in the end had lost them both. I accepted his apology not with warmth, but with a quiet, somber finality. It was, I sensed, more for his peace than for mine. It was the closing of a painful chapter, but the book would never be the same. That conversation marked the beginning of a new, fragile kind of relationship between us. We speak now, but our words are carefully chosen, navigating around the massive crater Ethan left in our lives. He never asks about the business's success, perhaps, because it's a painful reminder of what could have been. And I never ask about my mother. Her silence has been total and absolute. I believe in her heart she knows the truth, but her entire identity was so deeply invested in the myth of her golden boy that to acknowledge his true nature would be to acknowledge that her life's emotional centerpiece was a fraud. It's a self-preservation I cannot fault, but one I cannot forgive either. She remains a ghost in my life, a memory of a mother I once had. The whispers about Ethan still find their way to me, carried on the currents of small-town gossip. He is a cautionary tale now, a fallen prince. After the bankruptcy stripped of his charm-fueled capital and his wife's stabilizing influence, he drifted. I heard he was selling insurance in a different time zone then, that he was working at a car dealership. Each rumor painted a picture of a man untethered, constantly moving, unable to rebuild because his only real skill was selling a fiction, and his own story had become too toxic to sell. There is a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that still remembers a boy who shared a bedroom with me, that feels a pang of something akin to pity. But it's a distant academic feeling. The man he became is a stranger to me, and my primary emotion is a profound sense of relief that he is no longer in my life. I've come to understand that forgiveness for me isn't about absolution. It's about acceptance. I accept what he did. I accept who he islanded. And I accept that his place is in my past, not my future. My future is here in this workshop, which is no longer silent. It's filled with the sounds of creation, with the laughter and camaraderie of a team that I trust implicitly. Evan's legacy craftsmanship has become more than a business. It's a testament to resilience. Our reputation is built not on slick marketing, but on the undeniable quality of our work. Every joint is perfect, every finish is flawless. Because I understand in a way I never could before that integrity is not just a concept. It's a practice, a physical manifestation of your values. I hired Linda, my formidable accountant, not just to manage the books, but as a daily reminder to never again abdicate my own responsibility. Trust is essential, but blind trust is an invitation for disaster. I now trust, but I also verify. The most profound transformation, however, has been in the life I've built outside these walls. My relationship with Chloe, which had been my lifeline in the storm, became my harbor in the peace that followed. We found a home together, a place where the ghosts of the past couldn't follow. It's a life of simple, tangible joys, the smell of the soil from her garden, the taste of the meals we cooked together, the comfort of her presence at the end of a long day. She never saw me as a victim or a victor. She just saw me, Clara. She helped me understand that the collapse of my first family didn't have to be the end of my story. It was the brutal, necessary prologue to building a new one. A family of choice built on the solid ground of mutual respect, unwavering honesty, and a love that didn't need to be earned or proven. I look back at the woman I was before the discovery, the trusting, somewhat naive craftsman who was content to live in her brother's shadow, and I barely recognize her. The ordeal was a trial by fire. It burned away my innocence, my illusions about family, and my simplistic view of the world. It was the most excruciatingly painful period of my life. But in the burning, I was forged into someone new. Someone stronger, wiser, and more discerning. I learned that the stories we inherit are not always the stories we have to live. We have the power to pick up the tools and craft a new narrative for ourselves. My story is no longer about betrayal. It's about resilience. It's not about what I lost. It's about what I built from the rubble. My life now is rich not because of the money in the bank, but because of the authenticity that permeates every corner of it. I am surrounded by honest work, honest relationships, and an honest love. The silence in my life is no longer the tense, heavy silence of a courtroom waiting for a verdict. It's the peaceful, contented silence of a craftsman alone in her workshop at the end of the day, looking at the beautiful, true thing she has made with her own two hands, knowing that it is solid, it is real, and it is hers.